Hello and welcome to Recovery Weekly, an interactive weekly program used to guide you, the family member of an individual with a substance abuse problem, through the process of recovery. I'm your host, Scott Kalane, joined as always by my co-host, Ian Koch. Ian is a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, as well as an internationally certified addiction specialist with NortheastAddictionConsultants.com. Good morning, Ian.
Morning.
Our guest on the show this week is Michael Hoffman. Michael is an author and a doctor of addictive disorders. His published work, Life After Rehab, Volume 1, How to Stay Sober in the Outside World, combines spiritual psychology, mindfulness meditation, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Thanks for being on the show, Michael.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for the call.
Now, how did you come up with the idea for this book that you just recently written?
During my internship days, I worked at a place I won't name that was based on neuroscience, and they defied me to speak of spirituality in any of the counseling. And I thought that was a little odd, so I kept notes, and what I did in my individual sessions was pretty much what I felt was spiritually correct. So I kept my notes for 3 years about all the processes the different patients had gone through, combined with my academic studies at Pacifica. And I kept a big file of notes. I called it the drama file. And it took me probably about a year to convert all those into the book. So it's a book, it's really how to get your spirituality back as well. Because you have to get to stay sober.
And this is based off of Buddhist and Jungian traditions, correct?
Correct.
Now, I've been reading up on Buddhism the last year or so, and one of the things that I saw as a recurring theme is that they believe a lot in suffering, and that life itself is indeed suffering, and that we should always be working towards the acceptance of that. Do you spend a fair amount of time exploring that notion in a treatment?
If you have a person fairly well along in their addiction, you don't really have to clarify too much about suffering because they already are. So what I explained to them is how it fit in the teaching, 3,000 years ago, that people suffer, everybody suffers, because everything that happens in this physical life is impermanent. So their body's impermanent, their marriage is impermanent, their house is impermanent, their job's impermanent. And if they can learn to accept the vicissitudes of change as they go through life, they don't have a need to react when something, fades away. Instead of losing control of themselves emotionally and escaping into a numbing out experience like addiction is, they accept the change, adapt to it, learn from it. It's called heedfulness, learning from experience. And then you move on to the next experience. So of course, the first noble truth of Buddhism is life includes suffering. I have not found a way out of that yet. It happens. In other words, you have to change, but you don't have to suffer.
That's right. Now, Ian, you've mentioned in the past the human condition. Is this in any way similar, or how does this fit in?
Yeah, it's right in line, I believe. The thing that I think about addiction that's kind of funny is that the past 75 years have been the new world in addiction, but this stuff has been written about, like Mike said, for thousands of years. Buddhist traditions call it dukkha, the state of suffering, and then more of the Christian traditions call it the human condition or the false self, and it's this internal state of not good enough. We've talked before on the show, and I've talked about the grass is green syndrome, that I call it. The grass is always greener over there. When I get a new job, when I get a raise, when I get a new tattoo, when she loses a couple more pounds, when whatever insanity I tell myself, the idea of like one more is going to be better. But then when I get that thing, whatever it may be, I think another one is going to be better, and I mean, being honest with myself, I've seen it play out over and over and over in my own life, you know, and I know everyone I've come in contact with, it plays out in their life as well. And that I believe is the root of addiction. You know, I believe that when I'm doing therapy with a client, I have what I call the SMM, the spiritual malady meter, and you know, goes from a 1 to a 10. And the 1 would be like your normal person who typically they look normal, right? You know, they pay their bills on time, they go to work, they show up to work on time, they don't really take a lot of sick days, they have a decent relationship. You know, they're quote normal. On 10, you have the absolute low bottom alcoholic, heroin addict, been in and out of treatment, is about to die. Where I see a lot of the addictive disorders come in is around 7, 8, 9, 10. And we all have, to some extent, that belief, but codependents, addicts, you know, family members who are suffering from the illness are always up around 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, where the idea of one more will be better. If I could just get my kid into treatment, if my kid would only listen to me, if he would only love me, if they would only stop fighting, if one more thing. But when they get that thing, that's never good enough, and then it becomes, you know, this spiral. I've worked with families where the family says, if he just gets into treatment, well, then he gets into treatment. Well, if now he would just get a good job, then he gets a decent job. Well, if he just had a job that had insurance, or then he gets a job with insurance. Well, if he could just put more money in his savings account, or if he would just go back to school, or if he would just find a girlfriend that wasn't in, you know what I mean? Like all this stuff. And I mean, that's exactly what Mike's talking about.
So basically, if you're not happy with what you have right now in front of you, you're probably never going to be happy. You're always going to be looking outside yourself.
That's correct. It's a matter of perception. You know, the old Rolling Stones thing, reality and perception. It's how the entire Eastern philosophy, their science focuses on the mind and the body together, and Western science focuses on the externals. That's why we have so many psychopharmaceuticals. Well, you're acting that way, and I don't like how you're acting, so I'm going to give you something so you'll act differently. Well, I'm the suffering person. I want to understand and feel and know differently. It's an inside job, and that's why I'm so fond of portions of the program, particularly steps 3 and 11, which are the ones that point right at the spiritual end of it. I'm almost a 2-step guy, 3 and 11, but it's taken me 20 years to get to that point. So,
you know, also when we're talking about like addiction and suffering, me and Mike were talking about the other day about, and after we hung up, I thought of this. We were talking about how it is the externals, right? And in therapy, normal therapy, what happens is the client sits down with the therapist and the client talks about the drama of life, my job, my girlfriend, whatever. And the therapist kind of lets the client come up with their own solutions and their own answers to the problem. When we look at a bigger spectrum, and Northeast Addiction Consultants, our clinical consultant, Dr. Albert LaChance, he drew this to my attention, where when we look back at like thousands of years ago in terms of tribes, there was always the shaman. And the shaman was the one with the answers, and people would take their problems to the shaman. And the shaman would, you know, help them. He would guide them through the process. He didn't just listen to them talk about whatever is wrong. You know, the shaman actually gave them some very clear directions on what to do and how to get through the problem. And really, the shaman was the original therapist.
Absolutely.
Then we've switched into 12-step recovery with sponsors, and good sponsorship comes from the sponsor who tells the newcomer what to do. But then somewhere along the line, it's switched. And where therapy lets the person with a sick mind try to fix their mind with their sick mind.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why things, Mike, you've probably seen that.
It was the loss of the soul in therapy. There's a phenomenal book by the late James Hillman and psychologist Michael Ventura called "We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse," meaning the majority of therapy, with the advent of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is a Bible of symptoms and not of healing modalities, everything in therapy was shifted to fixing symptoms. There's no difference between that and giving somebody a pill to get rid of their asthma or their inability to concentrate. So yeah, the soul went away. Do we want to say when Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am"? I think it was him. Separating mind and body, Industrial Revolution, MTV, Saturday morning cartoons. When did we lose our amazement at life? I think my favorite poem of all that refers to this is St. John of the Cross, written back in the 1300s, Stanzas of the Soul, where he tries to escape from his monastery, run across the backyard to get into the woods to get away, and he can't because he bumps into Jesus on his out the door. Kind of a reminder, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do, and there's nothing to attain. I love you. And it's when we love ourselves, we realize it's an inside job, For those of us who have achieved some length of sobriety, that's the daily happiness that we have. So every day it's new.
A lot of what you speak of. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, good.
No, I was saying a lot of what you speak of, it's part of this whole movement known as mindfulness, right? I've heard of it in the past, where people speak about this, constant state of being awakened and having what you're talking about be in the forefront of their mind, so they're never, outside of the present and looking for these ways to bounce around from, either if it's an addiction or just some mind-numbing activity that causes them to escape for a little while. And I know that a lot of people suggest meditation for this sort of to get you acclimated with the idea. Do you preach that to your patients? Or?
Probably to a fault. I tend to be a little bit militant about that. It sounds kind of weird, a militant meditator. But I tell all of my clients and students out front, if you do not develop a meditative practice, this whole thing's a wash, because you will have nowhere to go when you're hurting. You'll want to run away from the pain. So I teach them all the elementary part of Vipassana. Vipassana is considered Buddha's early teaching. In Pali language, Vipassana translates to things as they really are. So things as they really are for me right now is sitting and breathing and looking at the screen and talking to you. Not what my new Rhodesian Ridgeback puppy is doing to my couch, which actually is present time. But Anapana breathing is that element of Vipassana which focuses directly onto the sensation of inhalation and exhalation. When the mind wants to run off and talk about car payments and other issues, you instruct the student to bring their mind back to the breath repeatedly, because the mind is a thinking machine and always runs away, but you can train it. And that's what Vipassana and meditation does, is any good form of meditation, effective meditation, brings you back to the present moment experience. Since we all know how to breathe, I think that's why Buddha focused on breathing. It's the natural thing we do. It's the breath of life. and the metaphor is pretty unavoidable. So I teach all my students, whether they become adherents after they leave. I'd say probably a third of them do. I do follow-ups up to 18 months. And I've got some people who have gone all the way with it and made it a regimen, a daily life regimen. They've gone off to do 10-day courses with Goenka or Shinzen Jung. So I think without it's step 11, sought through prayer and meditation. It says it in there.
You're right.
What do you say to the folks? Because I hear it all the time, especially folks who participate in 12-step recovery, which is, I can't meditate. I've tried it, and it doesn't work.
Bill wrote this great article in the Grapevine in the late 50s called Taking Step 11. And he said, the only people who don't pray and meditate or don't adhere to it are those who haven't tried it enough. Of course, it's the opposite of TV. Of course, it's the opposite of going outside for a smoke. It's really uncomfortable to a Western person. And guess what? For an addict, so is being sober. Very uncomfortable.
I remember when I started meditating, it started out on the edge of my bed with one eye closed and one eye open. And and I would look at the clock, and I would watch the clock, and I would think, all right, minutes gone by, I'm done. And but the funny thing about that is, like, eventually it went to a whole minute with my eyes closed. Then it went to 2 minutes. Then one day it was like, oh my God, I just sat here for 5 minutes. Yep. And little by slow, that started to develop and really change. And I think that's, I think we talked about it too, and I just wrote an article that we're going to put up in the blog. The problem with so much of this stuff out here in terms of addiction treatment is we want people to get well, but the truth is we don't want them to get too well, because if they get too well, they don't come back. And what kind of business model is that? The reason Coca-Cola is successful is because everybody likes Coke and always wants one more Coke. But that's not,
even without the cocaine.
Might be a great therapist. Like, if you're too then I'm not going to come back.
Well, Ian, if we really get honest with ourselves, and I think fellows like you and I are, and Scott, if we're really doing a good job, we want to become obsolete to our patients one at a time. I don't believe in creating diagnostic and symptomatic problems for people. Say, well, John, today let's work on your issues about your mom. Well, let's love your mom. Let's close our eyes. Let's meditate. Let's let mom things come up, and you can tell me what those things are, and we can deal with them. But you always go inward, and what happens neurologically is, in a good quality meditative experience, dopamine production increases. Corticotropin releasing factors, the anxiety the anxiety hormones decrease. So things that disturb a non-meditator and drive them into craving fugues don't bother meditators, because we see it come. We know this wave of emotion is impermanent. So knowing that, we'll observe it, evaluate it, chew on it a little bit, let it go.
But isn't it easier to just take a Xanax or two?
Yes, it is certainly easier. And I'll tell you what, that Xanax will really fix everything. Did you know if you take enough Xanax, you'll reach enlightenment?
I had no idea.
Or 30 to 40 minutes.
I've actually done that.
Yeah, that's that's the I think the immense popularity of opiates now. I'm seeing so much of that. I am not surprised to see an 18-year-old who informs me that she has been using heroin since she's 18 now, since she was 14. Yeah. What could be so stressful about some middle-class American kid's life in Mission Viejo, California, that they have to inject heroin. I mean, when I was in the 8th grade, it was not bad. Leave it to Beaver, the Beach Boys. I get that the world is more stressful. I get our society has got issues. That's why the meditative energy is coming back. You think about it. Yogananda came to the U.S. in the late 40s. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi came in the late 50s. He was my first teacher. Then the popularity of Zen, Alan Watts making that popular. Even Kesey wrote about that, and Jack Kerouac. So the Eastern philosophy, the whole thing of being comfortable with uncertainty, like Pema Chodron says, it's time. I mean, that's nature doing its thing. It's bringing this spiritual medicine to help us with this problem. I'm convinced of it.
Very good. I've actually read that book, Comfortable with Uncertainty. It's really good.
Isn't she great?
Yeah, he's fantastic. And it's good, too, because he's very repetitive, too. You know,
Yep.
where he does not allow you to forget what he's taught you. You know, and he'll make sure that it's vehemently clear what he wants you to remember and take from the book at the end of the day. And it's helped me a lot. But we should switch gears up a little bit and talk about where Carl Jung comes into your therapy.
Okay.
Do you he views addiction in a way that in any type of addiction is seen as a bad thing. Do you agree with that?
Right. I'd reframe it slightly and say he didn't say it was bad exactly. He wrote a letter to Bill Wilson in 1961 in response to a letter Bill had written him, thanking him for the work he'd done early on that had gone unrecognized. And they talked about Roland Hazard, who Jung had met with briefly and given advice to. And what Jung said is that the craving for alcohol was a low-level substitute for the thirst for God. So that's not exactly saying it's bad, it's just a low-level way to get there. And let's face it, when someone's an addict and they drink or use, they have a little bit of God. It just doesn't work long-term. So it is a poor substitute. And meditation brings you the organic, natural way to get there.
It's the spirit. I believe Carl Jung said something about when the addict looks for the spirit,
yeah,
or when an addict drinks or the alcoholic drinks a spirit, what he's really looking for is the spirit.
He closed that letter with a great line, which ought to be a t-shirt. He said, so the logical conclusion is, in Latin, spiritus contra spiritum. Spirits, meaning liquor, are contradictory to spirituality. If you drive by any liquor store, it says, liquor, wine, spirits.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't say liquor, wine, vipassana meditation. You know, so yeah. Jung's saying it's a poor way to get where you want to go.
And now, what teachings of Jung do you actually include in your therapy?
I start everybody off with the map of the psyche that he worked up, which shows the ego and the persona and the conscious mind. And then in the unconscious mind, he maps out, you have all of your complexes, you have your archetypes, you know, your hero, your villain, your winner, your loser, your saint, your devil. Then you have your anima, which is your creative, feminine, nurturing energy, your animus, which is your masculine, powerful, forward energy. And all these are in the unconscious mind, like the parts of the iceberg you don't see. Mm-hmm. So I teach them that within their unconscious is this enormous world of information that they don't access in traditional therapies, because traditional therapy works on the conscious mind. And the very bottom of his map of the psyche is the ultimate archetype, which is the archetype of the self. His idea was you individuate, you become who you really were meant spiritually to be. And that is happy.
Because that's
comfortable
the
with
natural
it.
state, right?
I believe it was. It's tough these days, isn't it?
At one point. The thing is, we attach to our identities.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, at any given time, you know, I could be the son, I could be a student, I could be a friend, I could be a kite surfer, I could be not a landlord, a tenant, you know. And at any given time, I'm going to act with the mask that I think you want me to be.
That would be your persona up there in the conscious mind.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we get possessed by some of these archetypes because they're comfortable, like a comfortable piece of clothing.
Mm-hmm.
So we use it because it works. And I think we end up habitually making unconscious decisions to slip into roles.
Yes.
But you've got to know what the roles are, and then you identify them and say, oh my God, I'm acting like the wounded child. Why am I on such a pity pot? I remember when I first got sober, I could not get a job like I had lost, and I whined to my sponsor. I said, I can't get a good job. He looked at me and goes, then get a terrible job. What? And I was on my pity pot. You know, I was the loser. I didn't get it at the time. I was too new, too uninformed. But now I get it. I also teach them to use Jung's technique of active imagination, which he writes about extensively as the final tool he would give somebody before they'd leave analysis, where he would teach them to go meditative state and literally call up a dialogue with archetypes from their unconscious. Say, I've got this problem with anger. I'm calling up my angry old man. I want to have a talk with him. Why are you acting like this, guy? Well, I'm acting this way because you've messed up your life. And you have a dialogue with actually a part of your unconscious. And this is what his technique was, that he said, you will never need to come see me again. Once you have access to dialogue with your unconscious material, it will tell you what you need to know, how to solve problems. And that's what his Red Book is all about, which, by the way, I just saw in a publishing newsletter that there will be a Red Book for the average reader. Not this $150 table volume, but a shorter version. This was his confrontation with his own unconscious, where he spent 2 or 3 years pretty much in seclusion in Switzerland, closed down his practice, and just kept a diary of his dreams and his active imagination dialogues. It is phenomenal. He told his family, when I pass away, don't let this out because people will discredit me. It's too imaginal. Well, as we all know, it didn't come out until 3 years ago when Sandhu Shamnasani got the Jung family to allow him to scan and reproduce the book. And now it's a masterpiece of active imagination. So I believe Jung wanted us to know, just like Buddha did, just like Christ did, like Muhammad did, like Meister Eckhart, all Yogananda, Maharishi, all these guys, it's all within. And in addiction, we look without to fix. It's not necessary.
Yes. So have you found in your practice that both Buddhist and Jungian traditions seem to treat addiction universally? Has that been the case so far?
Clarify what you mean by universally.
With every person, like you've got something out of it and they've changed because
Oh.
of... Yeah.
Well, I hate to say it, but more people are afraid to pursue the meditative work or the Jungian work than are not, because it's difficult. It's antithetical to the fast food mentality of our our culture.
That's true.
To do Vipassana practice for a half hour a day or twice a day is a challenge to a hyperactive nervous system. To study Jungian psychology, which does not follow the diagnostic and statistical manual, is a problem, because how do you bill insurance for the trickster archetype? Well, you have to say, oh, he's got oppositional defiant disorder, or as a younger person, it's conduct disorder. Jung was so far ahead of symptomology because he went down to the level of the unconscious where all the problems start and where all the solutions are. So it's hard spiritual and mental work to take the time to investigate these things. That is why people are frightened of meditation, why they will try it, and if it's not a fast result, they'll quit. Why it's taken this long for Jungian work to become popular, but it's expanding. I believe the fellow's on a roll. Now, these are still not mainstream, not yet. I work at do some work with the Zen Recovery Path in Costa Mesa, California, and we have written our own diagnostic and statistical manual. And we're also writing our own multi-axial diagnosis grid. And we have our own global assessment of functioning. Like I liked Ian's spiritual malady meter. Mm. We have a global assessment of spiritual functioning, of mindful functioning. And I am just waiting for next week because we're going to submit to an insurance company an individual patient utilization report using this entirely different set of standards. But what we've done, because we're smart guys, we coded each one to its complement in the DSM.
Yeah.
So we're trying to bring what is evanescent and wider and compare it to our narrow family. That's what Buddhist psychotherapy tries to do, to bring the soul and the mind together. I believe eventually it'll happen. There'll be times when you will be insurance reimbursable for being taught Vipassana. I'm convinced of it. Excellent. Or any type of meditation. It's credible.
Certainly hope so. So it at least makes your job easier and those who do your type of work. Now, how can people
sit with somebody and teach them to meditate and close our eyes for a half hour than trying to solve an unsolvable problem. When there isn't a problem that's unsolvable, because it's not a problem. Mm. Unless you're making it a problem. Then we get the whole Zen thing coming in about no mind. So that's a whole nother. Let's do a Zen show. That's a different thing.
That'd be great. Now, how can people get a copy of your book that you've written?
The best way is just to go straight to Amazon.
Just type in the title.
It's also available on Kindle and iBooks. So it's $10 for the digital version. I have it in hard copy and paperback. Don't write in it. Copy the pages and write on those, but don't scribble in the book because then you'll have to buy another one. But there are 35 chapters, and most of them require some type of writing or journaling or meditative experience followed by journaling. So it's an interactive book.
Okay. And how can people get in contact with you if they'd like to employ your services?
Best way would be to call me direct. 949-212-4149. That's in Dana Point, California. My email, and feel free to give this out, is heartcomm@cox.net. I'm currently redoing my addiction specialist website, so that is down. The new website coming soon, and you'll love this, www.jungbuddha.org.
Oh,
Nice.
you got
It'll
that,
be
huh?
GUNGUDDHA.org. So that will have an entirely new flavor, but that's just not up yet. So phone and email will be the way to go for now. And buy that book.
A lot of exciting things coming. I want to thank you, Michael, for coming on the show today. It was very informative and refreshing. Let's be sure to check out next week's episode where we have Callie Estes, otherwise known as the Addictions Coach, on. And that's the same time as always, 9 a.m. right here on northeastaddictionconsultants.com. And until then, I wish you and your family nothing but the best as they continue their journey through recovery.